The cold air that morning felt heavier than my grief. I remember standing there on the stone steps, staring at those locked wooden doors, trying to understand how my life had turned into something that didn't make sense. 2 security guards stood in front of me like I was a stranger. They wouldn't look me in the eyes. One of them kept repeating, "Ma'am, we were given strict instructions." Strict instructions. From my husband. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't causing a scene. I was just a daughter trying to attend her father's funeral. I stepped back and tried calling Gavin again. Straight to voicemail. I texted him once, "Open the door." No reply. Through the colored glass, I could see shadows moving. I could hear faint organ music. My father's favorite hymn. And there he was, Gavin, standing near the front, greeting people as they walked in. Calm. Polished. Controlled. Like he belonged there more than I did. A family friend, Mrs. Donnelly, noticed me outside. Her eyes widened in confusion. She tried speaking to the guards, but they shook their heads. One of them finally admitted Gavin had told them I wasn't emotionally stable and might disrupt the service. Emotionally unstable. I had spent the last 6 months helping my father through treatments. I handled hospital appointments. I sat beside his bed at night when he couldn't sleep. But somehow, I was the unstable one. The humiliation burned deeper than the grief. People walking into the church saw me standing there. Some whispered. Some looked away. No one wanted to challenge my husband during a funeral. After 20 minutes, I realized the message was clear. I wasn't welcome. So I left. I drove without thinking, tears blurring the road. My phone buzzed once while I was at a red light. It wasn't Gavin. It was my father's attorney, Harold Whitmore. His voice was calm but firm. "Avery, I just heard what happened. You need to come to my office tomorrow morning. 9 sharp. Don't tell anyone. Not even Gavin." Something in his tone made my heart steady for the first time that day. When I got home later, the house felt different. Too quiet. Gavin wasn't back yet. I walked into my father's old study, the one room that still smelled like his cologne and leather-bound files. I sat in his chair and let myself cry properly for the first time. But under the grief, there was something else growing. Clarity. My father had been many things, stubborn, private, cautious, but he was never careless. If he changed something before he passed, there was a reason. And if Gavin thought locking me out of a church meant he had control, he was about to learn how wrong he was. For the first time since the funeral doors closed in my face, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. I met Gavin at a charity gala downtown. I almost didn't go that night. I was tired of being introduced as Leonard Callahan's daughter instead of just Avery. But Gavin didn't treat me like an extension of my father. At least, that's what I believed then. He was confident without being loud. He listened carefully. He asked about my ideas, not my last name. After years of feeling like I was living under my father's reputation, Gavin made me feel seen. He said I deserved to build something of my own. He said I was smarter than people realized. Looking back, I see how carefully he studied everything around him. My father saw it too. From the beginning, he kept his distance. He was polite, but never warm. One evening after dinner, he told me quietly that man loves access more than he loves you. I was angry when he said that. I thought he was being protective and unfair. Gavin always knew how to respond to my father's doubts. He never argued directly. Instead, he positioned himself as helpful. When business conversations came up, he asked thoughtful questions. When my father mentioned a development project, Gavin would later bring me articles about similar investments. It felt supportive at the time. After my mother passed away, I struggled more than I admitted. I tried to stay strong, but I was exhausted. Gavin stepped in quickly. He said I didn't have to prove myself to anyone. He offered to attend meetings with me, just to observe. Then he suggested I skip a few, saying I needed time to heal. "You don't have to carry everything," he told me. "Let me handle some of it." It sounded like love. Gradually, he began building relationships with senior staff at Callahan Urban Holdings. He would drop by the office with lunch. He remembered birthdays. He made himself familiar. People started copying him on emails meant for me. He answered confidently, sometimes before I even saw the message. When I questioned it, he smiled and said, "We're a team." Claudette encouraged it in small ways. She would praise Gavin during family dinners, saying how responsible he was. She suggested it was good for a husband to take initiative. I didn't notice how often they agreed with each other. Board meetings changed too. If I hesitated on a decision, Gavin would speak up. At first, he would glance at me for approval. Later, he didn't wait. My father watched quietly, his expression harder each time. By the time my father's health began to decline, Gavin was attending meetings without me. He framed it as efficiency. "You should be with your dad," he said. "I'll represent us." I told myself that was what marriage looked like: partnership, shared responsibility. I didn't understand that every step forward he took wasn't about helping me stand taller. It was about slowly taking my place. When the doctors confirmed my father had late-stage cancer, everything moved fast. Appointments, specialists, treatment plans. I stopped thinking about business almost completely. My only focus was being there for him. At the hospital, I stayed as long as I could each day. Some nights I barely slept. Gavin began insisting that I go home early. He said I looked exhausted. He offered to stay behind and speak with the doctors or review any documents that needed signatures. At first, I felt grateful. I trusted him. Papers started appearing during those weeks. Medical forms. Insurance updates. Some business-related documents that, according to Gavin, required quick attention. I remember signing things in waiting rooms, my mind somewhere else. He would flip to the last page and point where I needed to write my name. "Just routine updates," he'd say. "Nothing major." I didn't question it. I was thinking about chemotherapy schedules, not legal language. Claudette began visiting more often too. She kept telling relatives that I wasn't handling the situation well. She said I was overwhelmed. She said the stress was too much for me. I overheard her once telling a family friend, "Avery has always been sensitive. Leadership might be too heavy for her right now." Those words spread quietly. One afternoon, I walked into my father's hospital room and stopped at the door. Gavin was speaking, and my father looked tense. Not sick-tired. Alert. Gavin was explaining something about restructuring the company to simplify transitions. He talked smoothly, like he was presenting to investors. My father's jaw tightened. His eyes shifted toward me when he saw me standing there. He didn't look reassured. He looked concerned. After that day, I paid closer attention. I noticed how often Gavin answered questions directed at me. Nurses would ask about family decisions, and he would respond before I could. Claudette would nod in agreement beside him. One evening, while organizing some papers at home, I found copies of documents in Gavin's briefcase. Power of attorney drafts. Proposals outlining changes to company leadership structure. My signature was on some pages. I didn't remember reading the full documents. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself I must have forgotten. Stress can blur memory. That's what I wanted to believe. The next day at the hospital, my father asked Gavin and Claudette to step outside for a moment. His voice was weak but steady. When they left, he looked at me in a way I hadn't seen before. Serious. Focused. "Avery," he said quietly, "I need you to come back tomorrow." Alone. I nodded, confused and worried. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Just you," he repeated. 2 weeks later, he would be gone. But whatever he wanted to tell me in that private meeting, It was important enough that he didn't trust anyone else in the room. The next afternoon, I went back to the hospital alone, just like my father asked. Gavin offered to come with me, but I told him the doctor wanted to discuss something private. That was the first small lie I told him. When I walked into the room, my father was sitting up, more alert than he had been in days. The machines around him hummed softly. He didn't waste time. "I don't have much energy," he said. "So I need you to listen carefully." My heart started racing. He told me that months earlier, he hired someone to quietly look into Gavin's background. Not because of jealousy. Not because he disliked him. But because something felt off. What he found disturbed him. Gavin had started 2 small companies before we met. Both failed within a year. Investors lost money. Lawsuits were settled quietly. There were outstanding debts that didn't show up in normal credit reports. My father said money had always followed Gavin in complicated ways. Then there was an engagement years ago. It ended suddenly. According to what my father learned, the woman's family accused Gavin of pushing for joint investments and shared property before the wedding. When her father refused, the relationship collapsed. I felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. "I didn't tell you earlier because I hoped I was wrong," my father said. "I hoped he would prove me wrong." He paused, catching his breath. "But when I saw documents being placed in front of you during treatment, I knew I wasn't." My hands went cold. He told me he had already taken steps to protect me. He had updated his will. He had restructured how everything was organized, the company, the assets, the properties. He didn't explain every detail. He only said it was designed to prevent manipulation. "Gavin doesn't know the full structure," he said firmly. "And he doesn't need to." I asked him what that meant for me. "It means," he replied slowly, "that if anything strange happens after I'm gone, don't panic. Trust the structure." Those words stayed with me. I wanted more explanation, more clarity. But he was getting tired. His breathing became heavier. He squeezed my hand again, the same way he had before. "You are stronger than you think," he said. "And smarter than he believes." Tears rolled down my face, but I nodded. I didn't fully understand what he had arranged. I didn't know what structure he was talking about. But I trusted him. 3 days later, he passed away quietly in his sleep. The hospital called me early that morning. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, feeling like the world had stopped. I had lost my father. And I didn't yet realize that his final protection plan was about to be tested. Standing outside the church that morning felt unreal. People I had known since childhood walked past me, confused but unsure what to say. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave me small, awkward smiles. No one understood why I was outside instead of inside beside my father's casket. I tried calling Claudette after Gavin ignored me. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. It was clear she wasn't going to help me. Through the heavy doors, I could hear soft music and the low murmur of voices. The service had already started. My chest tightened knowing I was missing the final goodbye. Guests began whispering. I could see it in their expressions. A few of them asked the guards what was happening. One guard finally muttered that I needed time to rest and that everything was handled. Handled. Inside, Gavin moved confidently. Later I learned he told people I was overwhelmed with grief and had decided to stay home. He painted himself as the supportive husband protecting his fragile wife. The story spread quickly through the pews. But not everyone believed it. My father's longtime attorney, Harold Whitmore, had known me since I was a teenager. He wasn't the type to accept things at face value. When he arrived and didn't see me, he asked questions. When he noticed the tension near the entrance, he stepped outside. He looked surprised to find me standing there. "Avery," he said quietly, "why aren't you inside?" I told him the truth. His expression changed from confusion to something sharper. He didn't argue with the guards, but I could tell he was thinking carefully. "I see," he said slowly. "Go home for now." That hurt more than anything. Go home. Like I didn't belong there. I stayed a few more minutes, hoping someone would come open the doors. No one did. Eventually, the weight of the stairs became too much. I walked back to my car, feeling smaller with every step. I didn't cry immediately. The tears came later, when I was alone in the driver's seat. I felt embarrassed, angry, and deeply heartbroken. It wasn't just about missing the service. It was about being pushed aside during the most painful moment of my life. That evening, after the burial was over and the house remained empty, my phone rang. It was Harold. His voice was steady but serious. "The will reading is tomorrow morning," he said. 9 o'clock. My office. I swallowed hard. "You need to be there," he added. There was something in his tone that made my heartbeat slow down instead of speed up. Not comfort. Not sympathy. Purpose. For the first time that day, I felt like maybe the story wasn't finished. The next morning, I walked into Harold's office right on time. The conference room felt cold and formal, with long glass windows and a polished wooden table in the center. Claudette was already seated, dressed neatly, her posture calm. Gavin sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. When I entered, neither of them smiled. Harold took his seat at the head of the table. He placed a thick folder in front of him and adjusted his glasses. There was no small talk. No comforting words. He began reading immediately. The first part was straightforward. Personal belongings were divided carefully. Donations were listed. Claudette was granted a generous trust fund that would provide her with steady income for life. She was also given full ownership of the family home. She looked satisfied. Gavin gave her hand a subtle squeeze under the table, thinking no one noticed. I stayed quiet. Then Harold turned a page. He cleared his throat slightly before continuing. His tone didn't change, but the room did. He explained that 2 months before his death, my father had transferred full ownership of Callahan Urban Holdings into an irrevocable trust. The company, all development projects, commercial properties, and investments, everything, had been moved under this structure. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears. Harold continued reading. The trust named one sole trustee and controlling beneficiary. Avery Callahan. Me. Not Gavin. Not Claudette. Just me. The air in the room shifted instantly. Claudette's confident expression froze. Gavin straightened in his chair, confusion spreading across his face. Harold kept going. Because the trust was irrevocable, it could not be altered or dissolved without strict legal conditions. It had been structured to protect the assets from outside interference. There was also a specific clause addressing marital influence. If any spouse attempted to control, redirect, or interfere with the trust's operations for personal gain, they would automatically forfeit any claim to those business assets in divorce proceedings. Silence filled the room. I slowly turned to look at Gavin. The color drained from his face. His jaw tightened, and his eyes moved quickly as if trying to process what he had just heard. The confidence he carried for months disappeared in seconds. Claudette pulled her hand away from his. Harold closed the folder calmly. The structure is legally sound, he said. It has already been filed and confirmed. No one spoke for a moment. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Steady. My father hadn't left things loose. He hadn't trusted chance. He had built something solid. Gavin opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. For the first time since all of this began, he had nothing to control. And he knew it. The silence in the room didn't last long. Gavin finally found his voice. He leaned forward and said there must be some mistake. He mentioned documents that had already been signed. He spoke carefully, but I could hear the strain under his calm tone. Harold didn't react. He simply opened another folder. There are additional protections, he said. He explained that my father had added specific safeguards after his diagnosis. Any power of attorney document signed during active medical treatment would only be valid if two independent physicians confirmed that he was mentally fit at the exact time of signing. Harold looked directly at Gavin. No such validation exists, he said. I felt my stomach drop as realization hit me. All those papers Gavin had pushed in front of me during hospital visits. All those rushed signatures. Legally useless. Gavin's expression hardened. He tried to argue that intentions mattered, that he was acting in the family's best interest. Harold calmly interrupted him. Intentions are not legally binding, he replied. Then he moved to the next safeguard. My father had also required unanimous board consent for any restructuring of the company. Not majority. Unanimous. Every board member had to agree in writing. Harold confirmed that no such vote ever took place. That meant any proposals or internal changes discussed privately carried no authority. They had no legal standing. Gavin's shoulders tensed. The confidence he used to carry into every meeting was gone. He looked smaller somehow, like the room had shifted around him. I sat there quietly, letting each detail sink in. My father hadn't just written a will. He had built layers of protection. He had anticipated pressure, manipulation, and shortcuts. He had closed every door that could have been used against me. I suddenly understood what he meant when he told me to trust the structure. Claudette stared down at the table, saying nothing. She no longer looked aligned with Gavin. The alliance that once seemed strong was breaking apart in front of me. Gavin pushed his chair back abruptly. The sound echoed against the glass walls. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Harold remained calm. It is final. For a moment, Gavin looked at me, not with affection or partnership, but with frustration. Like I had personally betrayed him. But I hadn't done anything. He stood up and walked out of the conference room without another word. The door shut harder than necessary. I exhaled slowly. The humiliation he caused at the funeral had been public. This one was private. But it was deeper. And something told me this wasn't the end of his reaction. It was only the beginning. When I got home that afternoon, Gavin was already there. He was pacing in the living room, his jacket thrown over a chair. The moment he saw me, he started talking. He said I had embarrassed him. He said I let Harold blindside him. He claimed he had spent years building relationships for the company and that I was throwing everything away out of emotion. I stood there and listened. You wouldn't even understand half the connections I made, he said. I was protecting our future. Our future. For the first time, the words sounded empty. I asked him a simple question. Why were you restructuring things without full board approval? He avoided answering directly. Instead, he talked about efficiency and vision. He spoke like he was still in control. That night, after he went upstairs, I opened his home office drawer. I wasn't guessing anymore. I needed facts. Inside were printed emails between him and Claudette. They weren't casual messages. They were detailed discussions about liquidating certain commercial properties. There were timelines. Potential buyers. Notes about how to move quickly after my father's passing. One message stood out. Once Avery steps back, we can finalize the sale without resistance. I felt my chest tighten. There were also financial documents I had never seen before. Bank statements showing inquiries about large personal loans. Attached to the applications were references to company properties as leverage. Not personal assets. Company property. He had been planning to use what wasn't his. The next morning, I confronted him with copies of everything. He didn't deny the emails. He didn't deny the loan plans. He tried to justify them. It's smart business, he said. You're too cautious. That's why your father never moved fast enough. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. This wasn't partnership. It wasn't strategy for us. It was positioning for himself. Claudette called later that day. Her tone had changed completely. She said she wanted no involvement in misunderstandings. She claimed she assumed Gavin had authority. Now that it was clear he didn't, she preferred to stay out of it. She distanced herself quickly. Alone in the kitchen that evening, I replayed the last 5 years in my mind. The compliments. The advice. The gentle encouragement to step aside. None of it had been about supporting me. It had been about getting closer to control. For the first time, I saw my marriage clearly. He didn't love me. He loved what standing next to me gave him. The next day, I met with my own attorney. And I filed for divorce. The first time I walked into the company as the official CEO, it felt different. Not because the building had changed, but because I had. People watched me carefully as I entered the boardroom. Some looked unsure. Others looked relieved. I took my seat at the head of the table, the same place my father used to sit. I didn't try to copy him. I didn't try to prove anything. I simply spoke clearly about stability, long-term planning, and honoring the company's foundation. I told them we would not rush into selling assets or taking unnecessary risks. One by one, the board members nodded. A few even thanked me for bringing clarity back to the company. They admitted there had been pressure recently to move too fast. Now they understood why. The company felt steady again. Gavin didn't accept things quietly. His lawyer sent letters questioning the trust structure and asking for access to financial records. It was an attempt to create pressure. But every time, the legal team responded with the same answer: the protective clauses were clear and enforceable. He had no authority. No leverage. When he realized he couldn't control the business, he tried a different approach. He hinted that divorce court would force asset division. He believed marriage automatically gave him power. He was wrong. Because the business assets were secured inside the trust before any formal dispute, they were protected. Personal property would be divided fairly, but the company remained untouched. I didn't attack him publicly. I didn't spread details or create scenes. I simply removed his access completely. His key card stopped working. His name was removed from internal systems. His presence at meetings ended. During divorce proceedings, my attorney presented financial records that revealed debts Gavin had never fully disclosed. Credit lines tied to failed ventures. Personal guarantees. Risky loan applications. The court reviewed everything carefully. When the final agreement was signed, Gavin walked away with far less than he once expected. No share of the company. No control. Only what was legally and fairly his. He looked tired the last time I saw him in court. Not angry. Just defeated. Claudette quietly sold the family home and moved out of state. There were no dramatic farewells. No more strategic conversations. Without influence over the company, her interest disappeared. The alliances that once felt powerful dissolved on their own. Back at the office, I focused on rebuilding trust inside the company. I met with department heads personally. I listened more than I spoke. I made decisions slowly and carefully. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not because I had won, but because I had taken back control, calmly, legally, and completely. Months later, I found myself back in my father's office. The room smelled faintly of old leather and polished wood, just like I remembered. The Boston skyline stretched out through the large windows, but I wasn't thinking about the view. I was thinking about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the humiliation, and the fight to reclaim control. As I sorted through some files in the trust cabinet, I found a thin envelope with my name on it. It wasn't labeled formally, just a simple note from my father. I opened it carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakable. If he ever tries to lock you out, remember, you own the doors. I smiled, a quiet, almost private smile. Leonard had thought of everything. Every step, every protection, every safeguard. And now, months later, I finally understood the full depth of his foresight. I called the head of our security team and explained that I wanted a full audit and replacement of the leadership. I wanted to ensure no one could ever block me from any company location, not even the old firm Gavin had used to bar me from my father's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that once enforced Gavin's power now worked for me. Every lock, every access code, every entry point was under my control. And then it hit me, the church where he had locked me out, the one where I had watched him accept condolences as if he owned my father's life, it was built on land my father had donated decades ago. That land was still legally owned by the Callahan Trust. Every inch, every deed, every legal right was under my authority. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to call attention to what had happened. There were no headlines, no courtroom battles. Everything had been quietly arranged, and now the balance had finally shifted. Gavin had assumed control he never had. Claudette had positioned herself to benefit from his schemes. But none of it mattered anymore. I didn't have to expose him publicly. I didn't have to prove anything. The structure my father had left behind did it all. I leaned against the desk and looked out at the city again. The weight that had pressed down on me for weeks, months, years, lifted slightly. I had regained what was mine, the company, the trust, and the knowledge that I was capable of standing firm, no matter the obstacle. The man who had tried to shut me out of my father's farewell, who had tried to rewrite my place in the family and in the business, had ended up locked out of everything. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It wasn't vindication for an audience to see. It was quiet, complete, and absolute. I closed the letter and placed it carefully back in the folder. Leonard had trusted me. And now, I was finally in full control of what he had built. Everything that had once been used to hurt me had become proof of my father's wisdom and my own strength. I was home. And this time, no one could ever lock me out again.